The grand ballroom of Blackwood Tower sparkled under crystal chandeliers. It was that special time of year when the rich and famous put on their best clothes and fake smiles for Elena Blackwood's yearly charity event. At 34, Elena had built her father's small company into a business empire worth billions. Tonight she wore a deep blue dress that probably cost more than what most people made in a month. Her dark hair pulled back in a style that screamed both power and money. Elena checked her watch for the third time in 5 minutes. The event was set to start in half an hour, and things were already going wrong. She tapped her heel against the polished floor, a habit that told everyone around her that she was getting impatient. "Ms. Blackwood?" A nervous voice came from behind her. It was Peter, her event manager, looking like he might throw up any second. "We have a problem." Elena took a deep breath. "What now? Please tell me the governor is still coming." "The governor is confirmed, but the pianist just called. He's sick, food poisoning, and can't make it." Peter wiped sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. "I've called 3 replacement services, but on such short notice, are you kidding me?" Elena cut him off. "This is a $5 million fundraiser, not some backyard birthday party. We need live music. We could use recordings. I have a playlist." "Absolutely not." Elena's voice could have frozen fire. "My guests are paying $10,000 a plate. They expect class, not some speaker system playing background tunes." She walked across the room, heels clicking sharply against the marble floor, toward the baby grand piano that sat in the corner. It was a beautiful instrument, a Steinway that she'd personally selected for these events. Now it would sit there useless. "What about someone in the office?" Peter suggested, following behind her like a worried puppy. "Someone must play as a hobby. Do you play?" Elena asked, raising an eyebrow. I took lessons as a kid, but nothing worthy of this event," she finished for him. "Figure it out, Peter, that's what I pay you for." As the first guest began to arrive, Elena put on her public face, warm smiles and firm handshakes. Inside she was seething. Everything had to be perfect at these events. Her reputation depended on it. When she was younger, other business leaders had called her the lucky heiress behind her back. It had taken years of ruthless work to change their minds. An hour into the event, the ballroom was packed with politicians, celebrities, and business leaders. The catering was flawless, the champagne flowed freely, but the silent piano in the corner felt like a glaring failure to Elena. She caught Peter's eye from across the room, and he shook his head slightly. No pianist. Maybe it was the second glass of champagne. Or maybe it was the way that tech CEO Thomas Wilson had just asked if her daddy still gave her business advice. But something in Elena snapped. She walked to the center of the room and tapped her glass with a spoon. The room gradually fell silent. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for coming tonight. Your generosity will help thousands of children access education they desperately need." She paused, letting her gaze sweep across the room. "Unfortunately, our pianist has fallen ill." Murmurs spread through the crowd. "But I thought, why waste such a beautiful instrument?" She gestured toward the piano. "Surely among the brightest and most talented minds in the city, someone here can play." The room went awkwardly quiet. Elena smiled, but there was a challenge in her eyes. "Come now, don't be shy. I'm offering a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity." She took another sip of her champagne, a mischievous glint appearing in her eye. "In fact, I'll make it interesting. Play something that truly moves me and I'll marry you on the spot." Nervous laughter rippled through the crowd. Everyone knew Elena Blackwood, never married, famously picky, and with a reputation for making outrageous statements she never actually had to follow through on. "I'm completely serious," she added, though her smile said otherwise. "Any takers?" After a moment of hesitation, Richard Hampton, the silver-haired CEO of a banking group, stepped forward. "I played in college," he said with a confident grin. "Let me give it a try." Elena gestured grandly toward the piano and the crowd applauded as Hampton sat down. He straightened his tuxedo, flexed his fingers dramatically, and began to play. It was Beethoven's Für Elise, the piece that everyone who took 6 months of piano lessons learned to play, and he played it fine, just fine. No mistakes, but no feeling either. Like a machine might play it if you programmed it to hit all the right notes in the right order. When he finished, there was polite applause. Elena smiled tightly. "Well, that was adequate," she said. "But I don't feel any wedding bells yet." Hampton returned to the crowd, his face slightly red. Next came a famous actor who happened to be in town filming. He played a jazzy little tune that he claimed to have composed himself, though Elena was pretty sure she'd heard it in a department store once. He hit wrong notes every few seconds and grimaced each time. "Perhaps stick to your day job," Elena suggested when he finished, prompting uncomfortable laughter from the guests. A young tech entrepreneur tried next, playing something fast and complicated that might have been impressive if she hadn't rushed through it, like she was being chased. Then came a socialite who clearly had years of lessons but no actual love for the music. With each attempt, Elena's comments grew more cutting. She knew she was being harsh but couldn't seem to stop herself. This whole thing was turning into a disaster. Peter was shooting her panicked looks from the side of the room, probably calculating how many donors would never return next year. "Perhaps we should move on to dinner," suggested Governor Williams after the fifth failed attempt. "One more," Elena insisted, her pride now fully invested. Surely someone in this room can actually play this instrument properly. The crowd had begun to shift uncomfortably when movement at the back of the room caught Elena's attention. A man in the plain black uniform of the building's maintenance staff stood near one of the service doors, watching the scene with interest. He wasn't supposed to be visible during the event. That was a strict rule. But he didn't seem concerned about being noticed. He was tall, with broad shoulders, and the kind of strong hands that came from physical work. His face was interesting rather than handsome, with thoughtful eyes and the beginnings of smile lines, though he wasn't smiling now. There was something about the way he was watching the piano that caught Elena's attention. "You there," she called out, pointing at him. The crowd turned to look. "Do you play?" The maintenance man seemed startled to be addressed. The room went quiet as all eyes turned to him. "I used to," he said after a moment. His voice was deeper than Elena expected, with a slight accent she couldn't place. "Well, care to try?" Elena raised an eyebrow. "Or are you just going to stand there watching?" Peter hurried over to her and whispered urgently, "Ms. Blackwood, that's just one of the cleaning staff." "I don't think—" "Let him try," she said loudly. "Unless you found me a concert pianist hiding in the kitchen?" The maintenance man hesitated, then set down the cleaning supplies he'd been carrying and walked slowly through the crowd. People moved aside, some with curious looks, others with barely disguised disdain at the idea of a janitor joining their elegant gathering. As he approached the piano, Elena noticed that he moved with an unexpected grace for someone in his position. He sat down at the bench and adjusted it with the automatic movements of someone who had done so countless times before. "Sir, this isn't really appropriate for staff," Elena began, suddenly feeling a flicker of unease at the spectacle she'd created. Maybe she'd gone too far. "Just one song," he said quietly, looking up at her with eyes that held something she couldn't quite read. "Then I'll get back to work." His fingers hovered above the keys for a moment and the room fell completely silent. Then he began to play. The first notes of Chopin filled the ballroom, soft, delicate, questioning. Elena recognized the piece instantly, Nocturne in E-flat major. But recognition was quickly replaced by astonishment. This wasn't just competent playing. This was something else entirely. His fingers moved across the keys with fluid precision, bringing forth sounds that seemed to come from somewhere deep within the instrument. The piece began to build, growing more complex, more passionate, yet he played with a control that made it seem effortless. Elena found herself stepping closer to the piano without even realizing she was moving. The talking, the clinking of glasses, the very air in the room seemed to have stopped. There was only the music rising and falling like human breath, telling a story that needed no words. By the time the final notes faded away, Elena realized she had been holding her breath. For several seconds, no one in the room moved or spoke. Then, as if waking from a shared dream, the crowd erupted in spontaneous applause. The maintenance man, this impossible, mysterious man, simply nodded once, closed the piano lid gently, and stood up. As if nothing extraordinary had just happened. As if he hadn't just played with the skill of someone who belonged on a concert stage instead of cleaning floors. The crowd pressed forward, questions flying, but Elena got there first. She stood directly in front of him, searching his face as if looking for answers. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the excited chatter around them. He met her gaze steadily. "Just the janitor, ma'am," he replied. "Alejandro Reyes, I clean the East Wing offices." Elena shook her head slightly. No, she said. That's what you do. I asked who you are. For the first time, a small smile appeared on his face. That's a longer conversation, he said. And you have guests waiting. Before she could respond, he slipped away through the crowd toward the service door, leaving Elena standing by the piano with an expression she rarely wore, complete and utter surprise. Alejandro. Reyes pushed his cleaning cart down the empty hallway of the Blackwood Tower at 5:30 the next morning. The building was quiet at this hour, just how he liked it. He moved methodically from office to office, emptying trash bins and wiping down surfaces while most of the city still slept. Last night kept replaying in his mind. He hadn't meant to play the piano. For 3 years he'd managed to avoid it completely, but something about that woman, Elena Blackwood, and her challenge had pulled him toward the instrument like a magnet. Now his fingers ached with a familiar feeling, like waking up a part of himself that had been asleep for too long. As he cleaned the glass conference room on the 40th floor, the sun began to rise over the city. Alejandro paused his work to watch the golden light spread across the skyline. 3 years ago, he would have been coming home at this hour, not starting work. His life before had been all late-night concerts, university lectures, and international flights. Now it was mop buckets and trash bags and being invisible. You're here early. Alejandro turned to find Elena Blackwood standing in the doorway. She looked different than she had at the party, less polished, more real. She wore simple black pants and a white blouse, her hair pulled back in a loose ponytail, but her eyes were the same, sharp, curious, missing nothing. I'm always here at this time, Ms. Blackwood, he replied, turning back to his cart. Early shift, 5 to 1:30. How long have you worked here? She stepped into the room, setting a coffee cup on the table. 8 months. And before that? Alejandro kept his eyes on his work. Different job. As what? A concert pianist? A music professor? Her voice had an edge of impatience. He looked up at her then. Does it matter? It matters when someone who cleans my building can play Chopin like that. She crossed her arms. People are still talking about it. The governor's wife asked for your number. Despite himself, Alejandro smiled slightly. I'm not available. For work or dating. Either. Elena studied him for a long moment. You know, most people who work for me fall all over themselves trying to impress me. You seem to be doing the opposite. Alejandro shrugged. I'm just doing my job, Ms. Blackwood. The one I'm paid for. Come to my office when you finish here, she said suddenly. Room 4501. I have 20 more floors to clean. After that then, she said, picking up her coffee. Don't make me come looking for you. She left before he could refuse. Alejandro sighed, knowing this conversation was coming sooner or later. He just hoped he could keep his job. The health insurance was the only reason he'd applied here in the first place. It covered the therapy sessions he couldn't afford otherwise. 4 hours later, Alejandro knocked on the door of Elena's office. He'd changed from his cleaning uniform into the spare clothes he kept in his locker, worn jeans and a simple button-down shirt. Come. In, called Elena's voice. Her office was exactly what he'd expected, large, minimalist, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a breathtaking view of the city. Elena sat behind a glass desk, typing rapidly on a laptop. She gestured to the chair across from her without looking up. Give me 1 second, she said, finishing whatever she was writing. Alejandro took a seat, noting the small details of her office. No personal photos, no decorative items, just sleek furniture and modern art on the walls. The only unexpected thing was a small record player on a side table with a stack of vinyl records beside it. Finally, Elena closed her laptop and looked at him directly. So, she said, let's drop the act. Who are you really, Alejandro Reyes? He met her gaze steadily. Exactly who my application says I am. Your application doesn't mention that you play piano like someone who spent their life studying it. That wasn't relevant to the position. Elena leaned back in her chair. I had Peter do some research this morning. There's an Alejandro Reyes who was a rising star at the National Conservatory, won several international competitions, was teaching advanced students by his mid-20s. Then 3 years ago he seemingly disappeared from the music world. She paused. That's you, isn't it? Alejandro felt a knot form in his stomach. He hadn't expected her to dig into his past so quickly. Yes, he finally admitted. That was me. A lifetime ago. What happened? The direct question caught him off guard. Most people danced around tragedy. approached it sideways with careful words. But Elena Blackwood apparently wasn't most people. My wife died, he said simply. Car accident. I was driving. Elena's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes softened slightly. And you haven't played since? Not in public. Not until last night. He shifted in his chair. Look, Ms. Blackwood, if you're going to fire me, why would I fire you? Because I crashed your fancy party? You were the highlight of my fancy party, she corrected him. Though I'm still curious why the man who used to pack concert halls is now scrubbing toilets in my building. Alejandro felt a flash of anger. Because life happens, Ms. Blackwood. Because sometimes things break and can't be fixed. Because your company has excellent health benefits and I need therapy I can't afford otherwise. He stood up. Was there anything else? Elena stood as well, unfazed by his outburst. Actually, yes. I have a proposition for you. I'm not going to play at your next event. That's not what I'm asking. She walked around her desk and leaned against it. I want to help you return to music. Alejandro stared at her. What? Your talent is being wasted. I'd like to sponsor your return, pay for additional therapy, provide a practice space here in the building, eventually arrange a small recital when you're ready. She said it matter-of-factly, as if suggesting something completely ordinary. Why would you do that? Because I recognize talent and I reward it. She shrugged. It's what I do. Is this about your joke last night? Because I don't expect you to marry me. A hint of a smile appeared on her face. Good, because that's not what I'm offering. I'm proposing a professional arrangement, not a personal one. Alejandro shook his head. I don't need your charity. It's not charity, it's investment. I invest in potential all the time, it's how I built this company. She picked up a folder from her desk and handed it to him. These are the terms. Look them over. You keep your current job and schedule, but you get access to a piano in an unused office on the 30th floor. I'll cover additional therapy sessions with any specialist you choose. If you decide you're ready to perform again, I'll arrange it. And what do you get out of this? Alejandro asked suspiciously. The satisfaction of doing something worthwhile. When he looked skeptical, she added, and perhaps having you play at select company events in the future, if you're willing. Purely professional. Alejandro looked down at the folder in his hands. I need to think about it. Of course. Take the weekend. She returned to her chair. But Alejandro? Don't say no just because you're scared. He looked up sharply. You don't know what I'm afraid of. True, she admitted. But I know what fear looks like when it's stopping someone from doing what they love. I've seen it enough times. Alejandro turned to leave but paused at the door. Why do you really care about this, Ms. Blackwood? You have $1 billion company to run. Why waste time on a janitor who used to play piano? Elena was quiet for a moment. My mother played, she finally said. Not like you, she was an amateur, but she loved it. When I was little, she would play every evening after dinner. The only time my father ever looked peaceful was when he was listening to her. She looked out the window. She died when I was 12. The piano stayed in our house, but no one ever touched it again. The unexpected personal revelation hung in the air between them. I'll think about it, Alejandro said quietly, and left. That evening, Alejandro sat in his small apartment, staring at the folder on his coffee table. He hadn't opened it yet. Part of him wanted to throw it away and forget the whole thing. He got up and went to the closet, pushing aside hanging clothes to reveal a small box on the shelf. He took it down and opened it carefully. Inside was a framed photograph of a woman with warm eyes and a bright smile, sitting at a piano. Beside it lay a wedding ring. What would you tell me to do, Lucia? He whispered. He could almost hear her voice. You know exactly what I'd say. Alex, music isn't just what you do, it's who you are. Alejandro closed his eyes, remembering the feeling that had washed over him last night when his fingers touched the keys. For a few minutes, the weight he'd carried for 3 years had lifted. He'd felt alive again. Maybe it was time. He put the photo back in the box but kept the ring out, holding it tightly in his palm. Then he reached for the folder and opened it. The terms were straightforward, just as Elena had described them. At the bottom was a handwritten note. The piano is already there. Room 3012, the key is at the security desk. Alejandro checked the time. 30 p.m. The building would be nearly empty now. Before he could change his mind, he put on his jacket, pocketed his wife's ring, and headed for the door. The security guard at the front desk of Blackwood Tower looked up in surprise when Alejandro walked in that evening. "Reyes? Thought you finished your shift hours ago." "I did," Alejandro replied. "Miss Blackwood left something for me?" The guard nodded, reaching under the desk. "Yeah, she called down about it." He handed over a small envelope with a key inside. "Room 3012, said you'd be coming by." "Thanks, Miguel." The elevator ride to the 30th floor felt longer than usual. Alejandro turned the key over in his hand, still not sure if he was making the right choice. When the doors opened, he stepped into the darkened hallway and followed the numbers until he found room 3012. The key slid into the lock smoothly. When he opened the door and flipped on the lights, his breath caught in his throat. The room had been an executive office once, but now all the furniture was gone except for a single item in the center, a gleaming black grand piano. Not just any piano, a Steinway Model B, the same model he'd performed on at Carnegie Hall 5 years ago. Alejandro walked toward it slowly, as if approaching a wild animal that might run away. The lid was closed. He ran his fingertips lightly over the polished surface, feeling the cool, smooth wood beneath his skin. "Do you like it?" He turned quickly to find Elena standing in the doorway. She'd changed into jeans and a simple sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked younger somehow, less intimidating than the businesswoman who ran a billion-dollar company. "How did you get this here so fast?" he asked. "I made some calls." She stepped into the room. "It was being stored in one of my properties across town. Belonged to my mother." Alejandro looked back at the piano with new understanding. "This was hers?" Elena nodded, walking closer. She would have hated knowing it was sitting in storage gathering dust. She gestured to the bench. "Will you play something?" "Just to test it out." He hesitated. "I don't know if I'm ready. Just between us," she said. "No audience, no pressure. I just need to know if it needs tuning." Alejandro sat down slowly, adjusting the bench by memory. He lifted the cover, revealing the keys underneath. They looked back at him, black and white, familiar and terrifying all at once. He placed his hands on the keys without pressing down, feeling their cool smoothness. Then, before he could think too much, he began to play. Nothing complicated, just a simple Bach piece he'd taught to beginners, his fingers remembering the way without much effort. The sound was perfect, rich and resonant in the empty room. Elena had been right about one thing. The piano had been well maintained despite being in storage. When he finished the short piece, he looked up to find Elena watching him with an odd expression. "What?" he asked. "Nothing." She shook her head slightly. "It's just strange to see you play. You're completely different." "How so?" "More yourself somehow." She leaned against the wall. "The man who cleans the offices is like a shadow. This version of you is solid." Alejandro closed the cover over the keys. "Both versions are real. Both are me now. So you'll do it? Accept my offer?" He nodded slowly. "Yes, but on one condition. Which is, I stay anonymous. If I ever perform again, I use a different name. No connection to my past career." Elena frowned. "Why?" "Because I need to do this my way." He stood up from the bench. "Take it or leave it." She studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Fine, but you'll need to sign the agreement. I'll bring it to your office tomorrow." "Perfect." She moved toward the door, then paused. "The room is soundproofed, by the way. You can play any time, day or night. You'll have the only key." "Thank you," he said quietly. Elena lingered in the doorway. "Alejandro, what made you decide to say yes?" He touched his pocket, feeling the outline of Lucia's ring inside. "Let's just say someone reminded me that hiding from what you love doesn't make the pain go away. It just adds more pain." She nodded as if she understood perfectly. "Good night, then." After she left, Alejandro turned back to the piano. He sat down again and played for hours, letting his fingers remember what his heart had tried to forget. Over the next few weeks, a strange routine developed. Alejandro would work his regular shift from 5 a.m. to 1:30 p.m., cleaning the offices and doing his job just as before. But afterward, instead of going home, he would take the elevator to the 30th floor and spend hours at the piano. At first, he played only simple pieces, the musical equivalent of stretching sore muscles after too much time inactive. Gradually, he began to work on more challenging compositions, his technique slowly returning through daily practice. Twice a week, He would leave the building for his therapy sessions. Elena had kept her word about covering the additional appointments, no questions asked. His therapist, Dr. Chen, was helping him work through the guilt and grief that had kept him from playing for so long. The music was so tied to Lucia in my mind, he explained during one session. We met at music school. She was in the audience at every performance. Playing without her there felt impossible. And now? Dr. Chen asked. Now it feels like, maybe it's a way to keep her with me. He looked down at his hands. When I play, sometimes I can almost feel her listening. The therapy was helping. But what surprised Alejandro most was how rarely he saw Elena. He had expected her to check in constantly, to monitor her investment. Instead, she kept her distance, leaving him to work through his return to music at his own pace. Until one evening in late October, almost a month after he'd started using the practice room, when he looked up from the piano to find her standing quietly in the doorway. How long have you been there? He asked. Just a few minutes. She stepped into the room. I was working late and heard you playing. Debussy, right? He nodded, impressed. Claire de Lune. Not many CEOs would recognize it. I told you my mother played. She moved closer, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. You sound professional again. Getting there, he admitted. Still a long way to go. Elena pulled up a chair near the piano. May I listen for a while? I've had a day from hell and I could use something beautiful. The request surprised him, but he nodded. Any requests? Something peaceful. Something that feels like hope. Alejandro thought for a moment, then began to play Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, the same piece he'd played at the charity gala, but this time he played it differently, slower, more thoughtfully, letting the notes breathe between phrases. Elena closed her eyes, her face relaxing as the music filled the room. He found himself watching her as he played, noticing how the usual sharp lines of concentration on her face softened. For the first time, he saw past the billionaire CEO to the person underneath, someone who clearly carried her own burdens. When he finished, neither of them spoke for a long moment. Then Elena opened her eyes and smiled slightly. Thank you, she said simply. Rough day? Board of directors meeting, she sighed. Sometimes I think they forget I built this company. They see a woman in her 30s and think, lucky heiress instead of competent leader. That must be frustrating. It is what it is. She stood up, straightening her suit jacket. I should go. Thank you for letting me listen. Anytime, he found himself saying and realizing he meant it. After that night, something shifted. Elena began to stop by the practice room occasionally, never staying long, never intruding, just listening for a while before returning to her work. Sometimes they would talk afterward, brief conversations that gradually grew longer and more personal. He learned that despite her wealth, she lived alone in a penthouse apartment and worked most weekends. She discovered that he had grown up in a small town 3 hours from the city, the son of a factory worker who had sacrificed everything to pay for his first piano lessons. They were from completely different worlds. Yet Alejandro began to look forward to her visits. The music flowed more easily when she was there listening, as if her presence somehow helped him connect with the part of himself he'd lost. One evening, as he finished playing a particularly difficult Liszt composition, she asked the question he'd been expecting for weeks. Are you ready to perform again? Even a small audience? Alejandro's hands stilled on the keys. I don't know, he answered honestly. There's a private fundraiser next month, she said carefully. Much smaller than the gala, just 30 people. Would you consider playing? Just 2 or 3 pieces? He felt the familiar tightness in his chest, the beginning of panic. You don't have to decide right now, Elena added quickly. Think about it. Alejandro nodded, grateful for the space she was giving him. I will. Later that night, as he walked home through the quiet streets, he realized something unexpected. For the first time in years, he wanted to say yes. The small envelope appeared on Alejandro's cleaning cart early Monday morning. His name was written on the front in Elena's distinctive handwriting. Inside was a note with just 4 words. Think about it, please. He tucked the note into his pocket and continued his work, moving from office to office with practiced efficiency. But his mind was elsewhere, wrestling with the idea of playing at the fundraiser. During his afternoon session with Dr. Chen, He finally brought it up. Ms. Blackwood has asked me to play at a small event next month. Dr. Chen raised her eyebrows. And how do you feel about that? Terrified, Alejandro admitted. But also, I don't know. Like maybe I'm ready to try. What's holding you back? He stared out the window for a long moment. What if I freeze? What if I can't do it? Then you'll have tried and learned something. Dr. Chen smiled gently. The question isn't whether you can do it perfectly, Alejandro. It's whether you're ready to take the risk. That evening, he sat at the piano in room 3012, not playing, just thinking. The door opened quietly and Elena walked in. She'd been traveling for business the past week and he was surprised to see her. You're back, he said. Just got in. She looked tired, her usual crisp appearance, slightly rumpled from travel. Thought I might find you here. Long trip? Tokyo, then London, then back. I'm not even sure what day it is. She sat in her usual chair. Have you thought about the fundraiser? I have, and? Alejandro took a deep breath. I'll do it, but I need to choose the pieces myself, and I don't want to be introduced by my real name. Relief crossed Elena's face. Of course. Whatever you need. And if I change my mind, then you change your mind, she finished. No pressure, no expectations. He nodded, feeling both terrified and strangely calm about the decision. Play something? She asked. I've had a hellish week. Alejandro smiled slightly and turned to the keys. He played a gentle Schumann piece, watching as Elena closed her eyes and the tension gradually left her shoulders. When he finished, she opened her eyes and smiled. Thank you, she said. I needed that. Rough meetings. The worst kind. The ones where old men talk over you and then present your ideas as their own. She sighed. Sometimes I think nothing I do will ever be enough to make them see past my age and gender. Yet your company keeps growing, Alejandro pointed out. True. A small smile played at her lips. And every time our stock price rises, I send them a personal email with just the new number. Petty but satisfying, he laughed, surprised by her candor. I'm starting to see why you're so successful. Spite is a powerful motivator. Her eyes sparkled with humor. Speaking of which, I should get back to work. Thanks for the mental break. As she stood to leave, Alejandro found himself saying, I have your mom's records. Elena stopped. What? The vinyl collection in your office, I recognize some of the albums. The Horowitz recordings of Chopin, right? And the Martha Argerich? Yes, she said, looking surprised. You noticed those? Professional habit. I notice pianos and piano music. He hesitated. Would you like to hear what those pieces are supposed to sound like on a real piano? Not a recording? Something flickered in her eyes. Vulnerability, maybe. I'd like that very much, she said quietly. Tomorrow evening? After work? She nodded. I'll clear my schedule. After she left, Alejandro turned back to the piano with renewed purpose. For the first time in years, he was looking forward to playing for someone, not dreading it. The next evening, Alejandro arrived at the practice room earlier than usual. He'd brought the sheet music for the pieces on Elena's records, along with a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. He wasn't entirely sure why he'd included the wine. It felt like crossing a line somehow, making this more personal than professional. But something told him it was the right choice. When Elena arrived, she looked surprised by the setup. Wine? She asked, raising an eyebrow. I thought it might help make this feel less like work for you, he explained, suddenly feeling foolish. But if it's inappropriate, it's perfect, she said, smiling genuinely. I just didn't expect it. She sat down, kicking off her heels and tucking her feet under her in the chair. A surprisingly casual gesture for someone usually so composed. Alejandro poured the wine and handed her a glass. So, he said, sitting at the piano, let me guess which of those records was your mother's favorite. He began to play the first movement of Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. Elena's eyes widened slightly. How did you know? The record was more worn than the others, he said simply. And it's often a favorite. As he played, he watched Elena's face. She was listening with her eyes closed. A look of peaceful concentration that reminded him of how his wife used to listen to him practice. The thought didn't bring the usual stab of pain, just a gentle ache like an old injury that was finally starting to heal. When he finished, Elena opened her eyes. She used to play that for me when I couldn't sleep, she said softly. Never as well as you just did, but it always helped. Tell me about her. Alejandro said, realizing he genuinely wanted to know. Elena took a sip of wine before answering. Her name was Claire. She was nothing like me, soft-spoken, gentle, always putting others first. My father was the ruthless business person, building the company from nothing. She was the heart that kept our family human. She sounds wonderful. She was. When she got sick, cancer, everything changed. My father buried himself in work. I was 12, trying to understand why my mother was disappearing before my eyes. Elena's voice remained steady, but her fingers tightened around the wine glass. The night before she died, she asked to be carried to the piano. She could barely sit up, but she played that sonata one last time. For me, Alejandro felt a lump in his throat. I'm sorry. It was a long time ago. She shook her head slightly. Your turn. Tell me something I don't know about you. He thought for a moment. I nearly became a chef instead of a pianist. I was accepted to both music school and culinary school and had to choose. Really? Elena looked genuinely surprised. You cook? I do. It's therapeutic. Like playing, but with less emotional baggage attached. What's your specialty? Spanish food, mostly. My grandmother taught me. She was from Barcelona. Elena smiled. I'd love to try it sometime. The words hung in the air between them, an invitation neither had expected. I should go, Elena said suddenly, finishing her wine and standing up. Early meeting tomorrow. Thank you for this, Alejandro. It was nice. After she left, he sat at the piano for a long time, not playing, just thinking. Something had shifted tonight, but he wasn't sure what, or whether it was a good thing. The next few weeks passed in a blur of practice and preparation. Alejandro had chosen 3 pieces for the fundraiser. Nothing too ambitious, but music that would showcase his returning skills. Elena had kept her word about the arrangements, handling all the details while giving him space to prepare. They still saw each other almost daily. Their conversations had become a kind of ritual. She would listen to him play, they would talk afterward, sometimes sharing a glass of wine or cup of coffee. They carefully avoided personal topics after that night with her mother's records, keeping things friendly but professional, until the morning before the fundraiser, when Alejandro arrived at work to find the building in chaos. What's going on? He asked Miguel at the security desk. You haven't heard? It's all over the news. Miguel pointed to the TV in the corner of the lobby, where a business channel was showing footage of Elena leaving the Blackwood Tower surrounded by reporters. The headline scrolling across the bottom read, Blackwood Industries faces hostile takeover attempt. Alejandro felt his stomach drop. When did this happen? News broke late last night. Some big investment group is trying to buy up controlling shares. Ms. Blackwood has been fighting it off all morning. No wonder she hadn't come by the practice room yesterday. Alejandro finished his shift in a daze, wondering if the fundraiser would even happen now, and surprised by how much he cared. When he went to room 3012 that afternoon, he was shocked to find Elena already there, sitting in her usual chair, staring out the window. I thought you'd be in meetings all day, he said. She turned to him and he was struck by how tired she looked. Needed a break. 10 minutes apiece before going back to battle. I saw the news. I'm sorry. It's business. She shrugged, but he could see the tension in her shoulders. They think I'm vulnerable because our third quarter numbers were slightly below projections. They're wrong. The fundraiser is still happening, she cut in firmly. Some things are more important than corporate wars. Alejandro sat at the piano. Any requests? Before you go back to fight the wolves? A small smile touched her lips. Something fierce. Something that doesn't give up. He nodded, understanding what she needed. His fingers found the keys, and he began to play Rachmaninoff, bold, complex, and defiantly triumphant. As the powerful chords filled the room, he watched Elena's expression change, her back straightening, her eyes regaining their usual determined gleam. When he finished, she stood up, looking more like herself again. Thank you, she said. I needed that. Good luck, he replied. With the takeover fight. And you with tomorrow. She paused at the door. Will you be ready? Alejandro realized with surprise that despite everything happening with her company, she was still thinking about his performance. The thought gave him an unexpected surge of courage. Yes, he said firmly. I'll be ready. After she left, he practiced for hours, focusing on the pieces for tomorrow night. But his mind kept returning to Elena, wondering how her battles were going. and why he suddenly cared so much about the answer. The evening of the fundraiser arrived with a sense of inevitability. Alejandro stood in the small anteroom of Elena's downtown penthouse where the event was being held. He wore a suit borrowed from the company's executive wardrobe. Nothing flashy, just a well-cut black suit that fit him surprisingly well. His hands were cold and his heart hammered against his ribs. 5 minutes, said Peter, Elena's ever-present assistant, poking his head through the door. Alejandro nodded, unable to speak. Through the partially open door, he could hear the murmur of conversation from the gathering of wealthy donors. They had come to support education programs for low-income children, a cause Elena apparently cared deeply about, though she had never mentioned it to him before. He hadn't seen her yet tonight. According to Peter, she was still handling the fallout from the takeover attempt. The business news that morning had been full of speculation about whether Blackwood Industries would remain under her control. Alejandro closed his eyes, trying to steady his breathing the way Dr. Chen had taught him. In the midst of his anxiety, a surprising thought surfaced. He wasn't just nervous about playing. He was worried about Elena and whatever battle she was fighting. The door opened again, and this time it was Elena herself who stepped into the room. She wore a simple blue dress that matched her eyes. Her hair swept up elegantly. Despite the polish of her appearance, he could see the strain around her eyes. "You came," he said, surprised. "Of course I came. I wouldn't miss this." She studied his face. "Are you ready?" "No," he admitted. "But I'm going to do it anyway." A small smile touched her lips. "That's all any of us can do." She hesitated, then added, "Whatever happens out there, know that you've already succeeded. Getting to this point was the real victory." "How are things with your company?" he asked, still fighting. Her eyes hardened briefly. "But tonight isn't about that. Tonight is about music and helping kids who need it." She reached out and briefly squeezed his hand. "Play for them, not for me or yourself or anyone else. Just think about those kids." Her words calmed him in a way nothing else had. She was right. This wasn't really about his comeback or her investment. It was about something larger. "Thank you," he said quietly. She nodded once, then turned to leave. "I'll introduce you now." Just Alejandro, no last name as requested. As she walked away, he felt a sudden urge to say something more, though he wasn't sure what. But the moment passed, and he was left alone to gather his courage. Minutes later, he heard her voice addressing the guests, thanking them for coming, explaining the importance of the education initiative they were supporting. Then she was introducing him, her voice warm with an emotion he couldn't quite name. "Our pianist tonight is someone whose talent deserves a far larger audience than just us. Please welcome Alejandro." Applause followed as he walked into the main room. Elena's penthouse was larger than he had expected, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a breathtaking view of the nighttime city. About 30 people stood around in evening wear, glasses of champagne in hand. At the center of the room was a black grand piano, not the one from the practice room, but similar. He sat down at the bench, adjusting it automatically. The guests settled into chairs arranged in a semicircle. Alejandro looked up and found Elena standing at the back, slightly apart from the others. She gave him a small nod of encouragement. His hands hovered over the keys for a moment that felt like standing on the edge of a cliff. Then, drawing a deep breath, he began to play. The first piece was Bach, structured, precise, requiring more technique than emotion. His fingers found the patterns easily, muscle memory taking over as his initial nervousness began to fade. He kept his eyes on the keys, not daring to look at the audience. As the final notes of Bach faded, there was appreciative applause. Alejandro moved directly into his second piece without pause. Chopin's Nocturne in C minor, more emotional than Bach but still within his comfort zone. Halfway through, he risked a glance up and saw several audience members with their eyes closed, truly listening. His confidence grew. For his final piece, he had chosen something unexpected, a Spanish composition by Granados that spoke of his heritage. It was passionate and technically demanding, building from a gentle beginning to a fiery conclusion. As he played, he felt something shift inside him, the last walls around his heart beginning to crumble. He thought of Lucia, imagining her in the audience, smiling with pride. The image didn't bring pain this time, only a bittersweet warmth. Then his eyes found Elena at the back of the room, watching him with an expression of complete understanding, as if she could see straight into his soul. In that moment, playing the final triumphant chords, Alejandro felt truly alive for the first time in 3 years. When he finished, there was a beat of silence, then enthusiastic applause. People rose to their feet, some with tears in their eyes. But he was looking only at Elena, who remained still at the back of the room, her face reflecting something that went beyond simple appreciation of music. As guests surrounded him with congratulations, he lost sight of her. For the next hour, he found himself caught up in conversations with people who wanted to know where he had studied, if he had recordings available, whether he would consider playing at their events. He answered politely but vaguely, still processing what had just happened. It was nearly midnight when the last guests finally departed. Alejandro remained seated at the piano, lightly touching the keys without pressing them, feeling oddly empty and full at the same time. "You were magnificent." He looked up to find Elena standing nearby, 2 glasses of champagne in her hands. She offered him one and sat beside him on the bench. "Thank you," he said simply, "for all of this." "You did the hard part," she replied. "I just provided a piano." They sat in comfortable silence, sipping their champagne and looking out at the city lights. "What happens now?" Alejandro finally asked. "With your music career?" "Whatever you want, I imagine." "Several people asked for your contact information." "That's not what I meant." Elena turned to look at him, their eyes meeting. "What did you mean?" "With this." He gestured vaguely between them. "Whatever this is becoming." She was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know," she admitted. "I didn't plan for this part." "Me neither." He set his glass down. "When I started working for your company, I was just trying to survive each day. I wasn't looking for anything, and now I'm not sure what I'm looking for," he said honestly. "But I know I've found something I wasn't expecting." A small smile touched her lips. "That makes 2 of us." "Your company, the takeover attempt," he began, "is handled," she finished. "For now, at least. I made some calls this afternoon, secured enough backing to block the move." She shrugged slightly. "It's just business." "It's your life's work," he corrected her. "It matters." "Yes," she acknowledged. "But tonight reminded me that other things matter too." She looked down at the piano keys. "I used to think success was measured only in stock prices and market share. Lately, I'm not so sure." Alejandro understood exactly what she meant. For years, he had measured his worth by concert halls and critical reviews until life had taught him otherwise. "What now?" he asked again, more softly this time. Elena turned to face him fully. "Dinner," she said decisively. "At your place. You mentioned you can cook." He laughed, surprised by the simple suggestion. "That's your plan, dinner?" "It's a start." She stood up, smoothing her dress. "I'm not proposing marriage, Alejandro. Just a meal between friends. Whatever comes after that, we'll figure out together." The echo of her joke from the charity gala wasn't lost on him. "And if I make something that truly moves you?" he asked with a small smile. "Then we'll see." Her eyes sparkled with something new. Possibility, perhaps. One step at a time. As they stood together looking out at the nighttime city, Alejandro felt a sense of peace he hadn't experienced in years. The future was uncertain, his music career, her business battles, whatever was growing between them. But for the first time, uncertainty didn't frighten him. "Tomorrow night?" he suggested. "I make a pretty good paella." "Tomorrow night," she agreed. Later, as he walked home through the quiet streets, he realized he was already planning the meal in his mind, thinking about which recipes his grandmother had taught him that would impress Elena most. For 3 years, he hadn't cared about impressing anyone or pleasing anyone. Now he found himself looking forward to tomorrow with an almost forgotten feeling. Hope. His phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Elena. "You might want to consider quitting your day job, but keep the key to the practice room, just in case." Alejandro smiled into the night. Whatever happened next, with music, with Elena, with life, he was finally ready to play again.